I was 36 when my family set my worth at $2, 2 crisp bills shaken from a plastic pig with the price tag still stuck to its belly. Across the room, my younger sister twirled a BMW key fob beneath a bow, as red as spilled wine, while my parents clapped like she had cured cancer. I had come home to announce my promotion, to finally be seen, but the room drowned me in silence. At 2:17 a.m., I left the house key on the counter, started my old Toyota, and drove into a storm that finally belonged to me. The living room smelled of artificial pine and burnt cinnamon candles, the kind my mother bought in bulk every December. Strings of multicoloured lights blinked along the window, reflecting off the glossy surface of the BMW parked proudly in the driveway. My sister, Lila, pirouetted in front of the tree, her freshly manicured nails catching every twinkle as she dangled the key fob. "My own Beamer," she squealed, hopping on her toes like a child, though she was 32. Dad laughed with open pride, clapping her on the back as though she had won a Nobel Prize. Mom clasped her hands under her chin, eyes wet with joy, whispering, "You deserve it, darling." And me? I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, clutching a plastic piggy bank that looked like a leftover from a dollar store clearance bin. The tag still clung to its belly, $1.99. Mom leaned in, urging, "Open it, Nora." My fingers felt numb as I twisted the rubber stopper. 2 crisp $1 bills fluttered into my lap, folding like fragile wings before falling silent. "A start for your future home fund," Dad said with a wave, as though he were handing me the deed to a mansion. My chest burned. I had driven 7 hours through mountain passes, wrapping carefully chosen gifts, a leather briefcase for Dad, a silver bracelet for Mom, a camera lens Lila once mentioned offhand. I had saved from each paycheck, rehearsed every mile of the drive down from Seattle. Tonight, I would finally announce it, senior structural engineer. My voice, I imagined, would echo in this room, and for once pride would shine for me. But as the bow glared from the driveway and the pig snorted in my lap, the words dissolved like frost on glass. The past rose uninvited, thick as smoke. My 7th birthday, Lila rode ponies in a tiara while 30 kids crowded the backyard, balloons tied to every post. My 8th, 2 friends around a sheet cake with smudged frosting, Mum explaining, "You're more independent." High school graduation, I stood at the podium as valedictorian, speaking about dreams and grit, but in the family section, seats gaped empty. Mum and Dad had driven across town for Lila's soccer game. "We'll watch the recording," Mum promised, and the VHS tape gathered dust on my dresser until college. Now, here I was at 36, still cast in the role of the one who didn't need them. "You've always been responsible," Dad reminded, a refrain carved into my bones. Responsible meant invisible. Responsible meant cheap plastic, while Lila's red bow blazed through the frosted window. I shifted the piggy bank in my lap, and that's when I noticed it. The tag on the ribbon wasn't even addressed to me. Written in Mum's curling script, "To Lila, with love." A mistake, maybe, but it landed like a blade. They hadn't just given me less. They hadn't thought of me at all. This wasn't oversight. It was a pattern tattooed across decades, visible in every photo frame where Lila smiled centre stage while I hovered at the margins. My hands trembled, not from cold but clarity. I stared at the tag, at the bills limp in my lap, at the bow glowing through frosted glass. I had prepared a declaration, a celebration. Instead, silence swallowed me whole. The gifts I had brought for them waited under the tree, wrapped with care, but already I knew they would not see me, not tonight, not ever. I was the afterthought in my own family, the ghost at their feast, and for the first time I wondered what would happen if I stopped haunting this house altogether. The house was silent by the time the clock blinked 2:17 a.m. I sat upright in my childhood bedroom, the glow from the hallway nightlight leaking beneath the door. Downstairs, the wrapped gifts I had carried from Seattle sat untouched beneath the tree. I knew then that nothing I had planned to say would matter. They would not hear me. They never had. I pulled my suitcase from the closet, sliding it open on the faded quilt. The motions felt both frantic and steady, as though my body had rehearsed this moment long before my mind caught up. I folded clothes, slipped in the worn teddy bear my grandmother had sewn by hand, and tucked the photo album from college between sweaters. Then I hesitated, my gaze landing on the dresser where I had once hidden essays and secret crush notes. Something tugged at me. I opened the top drawer, half expecting dust and broken pens. Instead, I found a neat stack of envelopes, yellowed at the edges, bound by a ribbon I didn't recognize. My breath caught when I saw the handwriting. Delicate, looping, achingly familiar. My grandmother's. Hands shaking, I untied the ribbon. The first letter began with, "My dearest Nora," her words spilling love and pride in a voice I hadn't heard since she passed when I was 16. Letter after letter, birthday greetings, words of encouragement for milestones I'd conquered alone, all addressed to me. But the stamps were dated years after her death, meaning she had written them earlier, saved for me, entrusted to my parents to deliver when the time was right. They never had. A sob clawed up my throat. Every word I had ached to hear as a child, "I see you, I'm proud of you, you are loved," had been here all along, hidden in a drawer. My parents had stolen not just moments, but the balm that might have eased them. It was one thing to be forgotten. It was another to be deliberately erased. I pressed the letters to my chest before choosing a handful to take, leaving the rest like ghosts behind me. They belonged to a version of me that had waited too long. This version was done waiting. By 2:30, my suitcase was packed. I carried it down the stairs, pausing at the kitchen counter. My house key lay cold in my palm before I set it beside the coffee maker, where Dad's automatic brew would hiss in a few hours. A silent farewell, more final than words. Snow drifted thick under the street lights as I loaded my bags into the Toyota. The car coughed to life, heater whining. I pulled away from the driveway without a glance at the white BMW gleaming under its oversized bow. That bow was a crown for someone else. The highway was nearly empty, the world asleep under winter's weight. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept my hands steady on the wheel. Then, just past mile marker 128, headlights exploded in my rear view. A semi roared past, spraying a wave of slush across my windshield. For 3 long seconds, I was blind, the world erased by ice and water. My pulse spiked. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles blanched, heart hammering against my ribs. When the wipers finally scraped a clearing, the Toyota swerved slightly before finding its line again. I pulled onto the shoulder, chest heaving, forehead pressed to the steering wheel. My body shook with the aftershock of what could have been, an end as unceremonious as the life I was leaving behind. But as the snow hissed against cooling metal, a fierce calm rose inside me. The danger clarified what I already knew. Going back was more lethal than pressing forward. If the storm wanted to test me, then let it. I was done surrendering. I straightened, signaled back onto the highway, and pressed the accelerator. Each mile I left behind was a brick lifted from my chest. Each exit sign a new foundation laid for a life not yet built. The letters on the seat beside me whispered the truth my parents had silenced. I was worth loving, and now I would build a life that proved it. The highway stretched ahead in ribbons of grey and white, snowflakes swirling like ash in the beam of my headlights. The Toyota hummed beneath me, steady if not elegant, its heater coughing warmth that barely reached my fingers. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat for the 4th time in an hour. I glanced at the screen. Mom. Again. For a moment my heart leapt with foolish hope. Maybe this time she would ask if I was safe, if I had eaten, if I had anywhere to go. But when I answered, her voice carried the same sharp edge of domestic practicality. Nora, did you remember to pay the electric bill for the cabin before you left Seattle? We can't afford late fees. That was it. No, are you okay? No, we love you. Just utilities. My throat closed as I murmured, yes, Mom, before ending the call. Tears welled but refused to fall. They gathered like storm water behind a dam, swelling pressure against a wall I had spent decades building. When the next buzz came, Dad, then Lila, then Mom again, I silenced the phone completely, the cabin of the car plunging into blessed quiet. The silence, however, was its own kind of cruelty. With nothing but the thrum of tires and the whistle of wind, my mind replayed every ignored achievement, every time responsibility was mistaken for invincibility. The dam cracked. Tears slid hot and fast down my cheeks, blurring the already dim lines of the road. I didn't sob. My chest moved in quiet heaves, the soundless grief of someone who had been taught to cry where no one could see. Hours bled together. Rest stops flickered past, their neon signs haloed in snow. At one, I pulled in to breathe, to sip water, to press my palm against the letters from my grandmother tucked into my coat. They were proof that I had once been seen, that love had touched me, even if second-hand. As I rummaged in the back seat for tissues, my fingers brushed against a small package wrapped in silver paper, one of the gifts I had left behind for my family. Somehow, in my haste, it had tumbled into the car. Heart sinking, I peeled back the tape. Inside was the leather wallet I had bought for Dad, embossed with his initials. I had tucked my receipt inside for safekeeping. But another slip of paper slid out, a bank document, creased and stamped. I froze. It was a loan agreement, my father's signature scrawled across the bottom, and in the collateral section, my name appeared, along with details of my college fund. The savings account I had assumed was mine for tuition had been pledged as security years ago. The money that was supposed to ease my way through engineering school had been siphoned off to secure debts that weren't mine. A chill colder than the storm swept through me. My sacrifices, working 2 jobs during college, scraping for scholarships, living on ramen, suddenly made grotesque sense. I had believed my parents when they said they couldn't afford to help me. The truth was uglier. They had chosen not to. Worse, they had gambled my future to fund someone else's present. The tears returned, but now they carried the metallic taste of betrayal. My hands trembled as I folded the document back into the wallet. I could barely see through the blur as I whispered to the empty car, "They mortgaged me." Saying it aloud was like ripping cloth. Ugly, necessary, irreversible. I shoved the wallet back under the seat and started the engine again, but the road had changed. Every mile now felt weighted, not with snow, but with the knowledge that I had been collateral in my own family. My existence had been currency, traded without consent. The silence pressed heavier than ever, and for the first time that night, I wasn't sure if I was running from them or from the version of myself that had once accepted scraps as love. By dawn, the snow thinned into slush, the sky paling to bruised lavender. My body ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my eyes raw from hours of tears that had dried and returned in waves. Hunger gnawed at me, insistent and sharp. When I spotted a flickering neon sign ahead, "Open, 24 hours," I pulled into the cracked parking lot of a roadside diner. The bell above the door jingled weakly as I stepped inside. Warmth washed over me, carrying the scents of coffee and bacon grease, the hum of an old jukebox in the corner. The booths were mostly empty, except for a trucker slumped over his plate and an elderly woman pouring coffee behind the counter. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a bun, her apron dotted with stains from 1,000 breakfasts. She looked up as I slid into a booth. "Rough night?" she asked, not unkindly, setting down a chipped mug before I could answer. Steam curled upward as she poured. "Something like that," I muttered, embarrassed by the catch in my throat. She studied me for a moment, then said simply, "Honey, I've been serving coffee for 40 years. I know heartbreak when I see it. Family or love?" "Family." The word cracked as it left my lips. She nodded knowingly. "Blood makes you related," she said, topping off my cup. "But love and respect make you family." The words sank deep, lodging somewhere beneath my ribs. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat bleed into my fingers. Tears pricked again, but this time they carried something lighter, not just grief, but recognition. Someone had said out loud what I had always known, but never dared to believe. After finishing a plate of eggs I barely tasted, I returned to my car. My phone, silent since I'd muted it, buzzed to life as I turned the key. I stared at the screen. Maya Ortiz, my college roommate, the one person who had witnessed my family's indifference up close. I hesitated, then answered. "Nora?" Her voice was warm, steady. "Where are you?" "Somewhere south of Portland," I said, my voice hollow. "Heading where?" I swallowed. "I don't know." "Then come to San Francisco," she said firmly. "Stay with me. Family doesn't treat family like this." The offer landed like a lifeline thrown across icy water. But guilt rose immediately, the old reflex. "I can't impose. You have your own life." "Stop." Her tone sharpened. "You've spent your whole life helping everyone else. Let someone help you for once." My throat tightened. The dam of silence I had lived behind cracked further. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Maya's voice softened. "Do you remember sophomore year? When you were working double shifts at the bookstore and the cafeteria, and you still had to beg for scholarship extensions?" "Of course I do," I whispered. Those were years of exhaustion I had never forgotten. "I was in the financial office once," Maya said slowly, "and I saw your mother. She was wiring money to Lila, something about an art program in Florence, the same week you were skipping meals to cover tuition." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles blanched. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I didn't tell you then because I didn't want to hurt you. But after last night, after everything, you need to know." The air left my lungs in a rush. Another layer peeled back, another betrayal revealed. They hadn't just withheld from me. They had actively chosen Lila's whims over my survival. For a long moment, the car was silent except for my uneven breathing. Then quietly, I said, "Okay, I'll come." Maya's relief was audible. "Good. Text me your location every hour. I'll have the guest room ready." As the call ended, the horizon ahead brightened, the first rays of sun breaking through the cloud cover. The letters from my grandmother rested in the passenger seat, silent witnesses to the choice I had just made. I pulled onto the highway again, this time with something new in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but the faint outline of it. The road was still long, the storm not yet over, but for the first time, I wasn't just running from something, I was heading toward someone. San Francisco greeted me with salt air and a skyline that looked both jagged and promising. Within a week, I'd filed for a transfer, my fingers trembling as I hit send on the formal request. To my surprise, approval came within hours. No favours, no strings pulled, just my record, my work. The validation steadied me, a small anchor in waters that still felt uncharted. Maya helped me find a place in the Mission District, a third-floor walk-up with west-facing windows that swallowed the afternoon sun and painted the hardwood floors gold. At 650 square feet, it was small, but it was mine. I bought a futon, a desk, and a lamp, nothing more. The emptiness didn't scare me. It felt intentional, like the first lines of a blueprint waiting for walls. Still, when night fell, the silence pressed heavy. The letters from my grandmother lay on the nightstand, her looping words whispering reminders that I had worth beyond what my family had measured. I clung to them as I scheduled my first appointment with Dr. Elaine Levin, a therapist Maya swore by. Dr. Levin's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. She wore sensible shoes and glasses on a beaded chain, her gaze steady but not intrusive. I perched on the edge of the couch, my palms sweating. She didn't rush me, only asked, "What brings you here?" The word lodged in my throat like a stone. I circled it, stumbled, then finally said it aloud. Favoritism. It sounded foreign, like a forbidden admission. The air in the room shifted, the silence not condemning but inviting. My chest loosened as though releasing something I had held too long. For the first time, I traced the patterns aloud, the parties, the empty chairs, the scholarships scraped together while Lila painted in Florence. Dr. Levin nodded gently, never interrupting. "And how did that make you feel?" she asked finally. I stared at my hands. Like I was worth less, like I was invisible. The words spilled, clumsy but true. She gave no easy answers, just a soft reminder. Naming wounds is the first step to healing them. For a brief moment I felt lighter, as though therapy might finally offer a place to set down the burdens I'd carried. But the reprieve didn't last. A week later, whispers reached me in the least expected place. Work. One of my colleagues, a project coordinator I had mentored, approached hesitantly after a meeting. "Nora," she said carefully, "I don't know if it's true, but I heard your parents say you've been struggling mentally, that you left home because of breakdowns." The words sliced sharper than any blade. My own parents, sewing stories about me losing my mind. For years, they had painted me as too independent, too capable. Now, as soon as I had walked away, they spun a narrative of weakness. I forced a neutral smile. "Thank you for telling me," I managed, though my chest was burning. After she left, I locked myself in the restroom, pressing trembling hands against the sink. My reflection wavered in the mirror, pale and exhausted. The betrayal deepened. It wasn't enough for them to dismiss me in private. Now they were rewriting me in public, eroding the reputation I had built brick by brick. Co-workers who once trusted me now glanced sideways, their eyes laced with pity. Emails carried a polite but noticeable distance. I felt my foundation wobble. That night, I walked the streets of San Francisco until my legs ached. Every honk, every busker's song, every whiff of sourdough and salt felt sharper, more real, as though daring me to collapse. But the city didn't collapse beneath me. I was the one shaking. Back in my apartment, I spread my grandmother's letters across the futon, tracing her words like scaffolding. "You are strong," she had written in one, "but strength isn't silence." The reminder steadied me. If my family wanted to tell lies, then I would show truth, not through words, but through work. The next morning I doubled down. I arrived early, left late, took on complex calculations that no one else wanted. When my designs passed peer review with barely a correction, I caught the flicker of respect returning in my colleagues' eyes. Each approval felt like mortar between bricks, sealing cracks the rumours had tried to carve. But even as I built outward, inside I trembled. The sting of betrayal lingered, gnawing at my bones. The very people who should have defended me had weaponized lies instead. And for the first time I wondered if their vision of me, as disposable, as broken, would ever stop shadowing my steps. Saturday mornings became a ritual. Maya nudged me into signing up for a pottery class at the community centre, insisting I needed something that wasn't work or therapy. I resisted at first. My hands were built for calculations, not creation. But eventually, I found myself at a long table with slabs of clay, surrounded by strangers with aprons already streaked in mud. The instructor, a woman with silver hair tucked under a paint-splattered bandana, guided us gently. "Don't force it," she said, circling the room. "Clay remembers pressure. Listen to what it wants to become." When my hands first pressed into the cool lump, resistance met me. The clay sagged, collapsed under my clumsy fingers, then hardened in ridges where I pushed too much. My frustration rose, but I remembered her words. I eased my grip, tried coaxing instead of commanding. Slowly, a shape emerged, a crooked bowl, uneven and ugly by conventional standards, but when I lifted it from the wheel, a strange pride welled up. It was imperfect, but it was mine. I left class with clay under my nails and a faint lightness in my chest. Creation, even flawed, felt like reclaiming space. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find a new email blinking in my inbox. No sender name, only a generic address. Subject line, "Please read." My stomach tightened as I clicked. "Nora," it began, "I know you're angry, but I need your help. Things are bad here. Dad can't cover everything, and Mum says you've always been the responsible one. I don't have anyone else to ask. Please send what you can. Just a little. For family." I read it twice, heart-twisting. The words carried a rehearsed tone, echoes of my parents' voices woven into every line. "You've always been the responsible one. Just a little." The guilt was familiar, an old leash tugging tight around my neck. For a moment I let myself imagine it was sincere, that Lila, my sister who once twirled keys under a red bow, was reaching across the gulf for reconciliation. The thought almost softened me, almost. But the cadence betrayed her. My mother's phrases, my father's pressure, it was all there. This wasn't Lila speaking from her heart. It was Lila echoing the script they had fed her, a performance for pity designed to reel me back into the role I had abandoned. My hand shook as I closed the laptop. The temptation to respond, to cave, to fix things as I always had, roared inside me. But then I looked around my apartment, the futon, the sunlight across hardwood, the crooked bowl drying on the counter. This space was small, yes, but it was free of demands that hollowed me out. I whispered to the silence, "No." Instead of replying, I opened my nightstand drawer and took out one of my grandmother's letters. Her words reminded me, strength isn't silence, but silence can be strength when it guards your boundaries. I slipped the letter back, steadied my breath, and placed another crisp $2 bill into the piggy bank on the shelf. My quiet rebellion. Days passed without another message. The email sat unanswered. A boundary line I had drawn not in anger but in resolve. For the first time I realized that not responding was also a response, a declaration that I would no longer be currency for their crises. At work, my projects began earning recognition. A senior manager praised my design for a seismic retrofit, noting its elegance and efficiency. The rumour of breakdowns began to fade as my results spoke louder. My foundation, once shaken, was setting firm again, and in the evenings my pottery collection grew, misshapen cups, wobbly plates, each a testament that imperfect things could still hold value. Each creation reminded me of the truth my family had denied me. I didn't need their approval to be real. The silence from my parents stretched, but instead of dread, I felt a fragile relief. They would try again, I knew. The tug of manipulation always returned, but when it did, I would have practice. Clay under my fingers, a crooked bowl on my counter, a piggy bank that no longer mocked me, but measured my freedom. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday evening, slipped beneath my apartment door, along with bills and a flyer for discounted yoga. Its ivory paper gleamed under the lamplight, Brianna Cole's name looping in calligraphy across the front. My cousin's wedding, an event I had both dreaded and expected. I slit it open with the edge of a house key. The invitation itself was beautiful. embossed with magnolia blossoms to match the venue. For a moment, I allowed myself to admire it, to imagine a celebration that might hold joy instead of obligation. Then I saw the seating card tucked inside. Table 7, Nora Bennett. Beneath it, a neat chart showed where I would sit, wedged between Victor and Marlene, directly across from Lila. My stomach clenched. The arrangement wasn't coincidence, it was choreography, a family portrait in real time, staged for the benefit of watching relatives. They didn't want me there as myself. They wanted me there as a prop in their story of reconciliation. I dropped the card onto the table, my pulse hammering. For days, I avoided looking at it. But the thought festered, growing sharper with each passing hour. Finally, I opened my laptop to email Brianna, planning only to decline politely. That's when the second twist landed. Attached by mistake was a spreadsheet labelled seating plan _final. The file contained notes beside certain names. My breath caught when I reached mine. Nora between parents and Lila. Important for optics. Family must appear reunited. My jaw tightened. Optics. I wasn't a cousin or a guest. I was a pawn in someone else's theatre. The fury that surged through me wasn't just anger at the manipulation. It was rage at how casually it was scripted. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I sat back, staring at the screen until the words blurred. Then, slowly, I began typing. Brianna, thank you for the invitation. I'll be attending. However, I cannot sit at table 7. Please place me elsewhere. Perhaps with the younger cousins or friends of the bride. If that's not possible, I'll decline my RSVP. I hit send before I could soften it. My heart pounded as though I had thrown a stone through a window. But for once, I didn't scramble to apologize. I let the shards fall where they may. 2 days later, Brianna replied, Of course, Nora. I'll move you to table 12 with my college friends and cousins around our age. I understand. Thank you for telling me directly. Relief swept me, mingled with surprise. No anger, no guilt, no manipulation, just accommodation. I hadn't realized until that moment how foreign it felt to be heard without punishment. Yet the bitterness lingered. My parents' plan was clear. Parade me beside them, across from the sister who had always been their jewel, as proof that all was well. That Nora had come crawling back, forgiven and folded neatly into the family tableau. The thought made bile rise in my throat. Instead, I imagined myself at table 12, surrounded by laughter that wasn't sharpened by competition. Perhaps even enjoying myself. The image felt radical, almost illicit. To exist within the family orbit but not as their stage piece, could I really claim that space? I thought of the crooked bowl on my counter, of the $2 bills collecting in the piggy bank. Each one marked a week of freedom. Each one whispered that boundaries weren't walls, they were foundations. So I marked the date on my calendar. I would go, but not as they expected. I would walk into that hall, not as the daughter who absorbed every slight, but as the woman who could choose where to sit. And if anyone asked why I wasn't at table 7, I would smile and tell the truth. Optics were never my concern. Flying back into Portland felt like willingly stepping into a storm I had once escaped. The city looked the same, rain-washed streets, bridges arched over grey rivers, but to me it felt smaller, as though the years away had shrunk its hold. I rented a modest sedan at the airport and drove to the hotel instead of my parents' house, another small but deliberate boundary. That evening, the rehearsal dinner buzzed with chatter. Laughter echoed off the magnolia-printed walls of the banquet hall. Cousins clustered in groups, aunts compared notes on recipes, uncles filled glasses a little too generously. When I entered, heads turned, conversations pausing just long enough to sting. I forced myself to keep walking, shoulders squared, dress simple but precise. Brianna welcomed me warmly, pulling me into a hug. Gratitude softened the edges of my dread. At least one person wanted me here for me, not for optics. I took my seat at table 12, and for a moment the world steadied. Then came the whispers. "Did you hear? Victor's been out of work for months. Marlene says they're selling the house." Fragments floated through the air like embers, drifting toward me no matter where I turned. I sipped water, listening without reacting. Later, an aunt with too much wine in her glass leaned close. "Your poor father," she murmured. "Laid off right before Christmas. They say the company downsized, but between us, I think he lost his grip. Stress, maybe. It's been hard on your mother." I nodded politely, the information landing with a muted thud. Hardship wasn't foreign, but the timing felt suspiciously framed, as though my absence had triggered collapse. The narrative wrote itself. Nora leaves, the family crumbles. Convenient. But the real blow came later, when Cousin Tara cornered me near the buffet. She lowered her voice, eyes darting to be sure no one else was listening. "Nora, I don't know if you know this, but your dad once used your name to secure a loan." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, my name?" She swallowed hard. "Years ago, when Lila wanted the BMW, he needed leverage for the loan, so he listed you as a co-borrower, said you'd co-signed, only—" She hesitated. "I don't think you ever did." The room tilted. Images crashed in my mind. The bank document I had found stuffed in Dad's wallet, the way my tuition had evaporated while Lila's whims thrived. My father hadn't just drained my future, he had forged my name to build hers. For a moment, fury and disbelief battled inside me, my breath shallow, hands cold. It was one thing to siphon money, another to steal my signature, my legal existence. A wave of nausea threatened to drop me to my knees. But then Tara's hand squeezed mine. "I always thought it was wrong," she whispered. "I never said anything, but I want you to know you weren't crazy. You were treated unfairly." Her words struck deeper than the betrayal. For the first time in years, someone in the family acknowledged the truth aloud. Not pity, not dismissal, validation. My throat tightened with gratitude I didn't know how to voice. As the evening wore on, more small confessions surfaced. An uncle admitted he had noticed how my accomplishments were brushed aside. A cousin recalled the empty seats at my graduation. Each acknowledgement was a shard of glass refracted into something softer, recognition. I walked back to my hotel room that night, carrying two truths at once. My father had carved lies into legal stone, but the silence in the family was cracking. Some were finally willing to admit what I had known all along. I had been wronged. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it planted something unexpected, hope. Not hope for my parents, perhaps, but for myself. Hope that the truth had witnesses now, that my story would no longer be gaslit into invisibility. As I slipped the keycard into my hotel door, I realized that even here, surrounded by betrayal, the ground felt steadier than it had in years. For once, I wasn't entirely alone in the reckoning. The library at Magnolia House smelled faintly of polished oak and old paper, the kind of room meant for hushed voices and solemn agreements. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I found myself summoned there by a message slipped under my hotel door. "We need to talk as a family." When I pushed the heavy door open, the scene looked rehearsed. My father paced near the fireplace, bourbon in hand despite the early hour. My mother sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, tissues clutched like props. Lila stood by the window, arms folded, her dress glittering under the pale light. "Nora," my father said, gesturing sharply to the empty chair set opposite them. "Sit. This can't wait any longer." I stayed near the door, my suitcase of emotions already packed, unwilling to unpack them here. "I'm listening," I said evenly. He began without preamble. "Your leaving at Christmas destroyed this family. I lost my job under the stress. Your mother's health has suffered. We're selling the house. All because you abandoned us." The words hit like stones, each accusation stacked neatly into a wall designed to box me in. I felt the sting, but beneath it, an odd clarity. They weren't here to reconcile, they were here to assign blame, to drag me back into the role of scapegoat. Lila chimed in, her voice brittle. You don't understand how hard it's been. Mom cries every night. Dad can't sleep. You leaving tore everything apart. I almost laughed at the absurdity. 36 years of neglect, and suddenly my absence was the cause of collapse. They had built the structure wrong from the start. My leaving only exposed the cracks. Then my mother leaned forward, her hand trembling as she unfolded a sheet of paper from her purse. The doctor says my blood pressure is dangerously high. I could have a stroke at any moment. She pushed the page toward me, her eyes brimming with rehearsed tears. Do you want that on your conscience? I took the paper carefully, scanning the lines. The date at the top leapt out first. 3 years old. A routine checkup, not an emergency. My chest tightened with a mix of rage and grief. They weren't even careful with their lies. I placed the paper back on the table. This is old, I said quietly. It's not current. And even if it were, my choices don't cause your blood pressure. Your actions do. Her face crumpled into exaggerated anguish, but for once I didn't flinch. The manipulation was naked, almost grotesque in its transparency. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. My father's jaw clenched, the bourbon glass trembling in his grip. You've always been ungrateful, he snapped. We gave you everything you needed. I thought of the forged loans, the stolen tuition, the piggy bank with $2. My lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. Everything except honesty, everything except love without conditions. Lila shifted, her gaze darting away. For the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in her posture, as though some part of her recognized the script they were reading from. Still, the performance continued. My mother dabbed her eyes, whispering, "We only wanted what was best." Best for whom? I wanted to ask. Best for Lila's art programs, her cars, her curated life. Best for the image of a family intact, even as the beams rotted beneath the paint. The weight of their stage play pressed down, but it no longer crushed me. If anything, the falseness illuminated the truth more starkly. I had been cast as the problem not because I was broken, but because I refused to play along. I stood, refusing the empty chair. I need to get ready for the ceremony, I said, my voice steady. If you want to talk again, it will have to be with a mediator present, not like this. My father's face reddened, my mother's sobs rose higher. Lila looked torn between sides. But I walked out before any of them could anchor me back into the script. The heavy door closed behind me with a thud that sounded to my ears like the end of an act. The oak-panelled library seemed to shrink as I pulled a leather-bound album from my tote. My parents' faces shifted from outrage to confusion as I set it on the table between us. If we're talking about responsibility, I said evenly, then let's actually talk about history. I flipped the pages deliberately, the sound of each turn sharp as a gavel. Side-by-side photographs appeared, Lila's birthday parties with ponies and hired entertainers, mine with sheet cakes and plastic cups. Lila's glowing graduation photos in front of cheering crowds, mine a podium with empty seats where my parents should have been. My father scoffed. Old memories, you can't live in the past. I met his gaze. Patterns aren't the past, they're proof. From another folder, I pulled out photocopies of financial records I had pieced together over the past year. My hands were steady now, not trembling as they had been that night in the car. Here, I said, sliding them across the table. The account statements from my college fund. Notice the withdrawals. Now compare them to the loan agreement for the BMW. Lila's head snapped up. What? The colour drained from my father's face. He tried to cover it with bluster. You don't understand how finances work. But I cut him off. voice ringing harder than I expected. I understand perfectly. You mortgaged my future for her car. You used money meant for my education to fund her image. And when I struggled through double shifts and scholarship appeals, you told me to be grateful, to be independent. Silence fell, heavy and unyielding. Lila's hands trembled at her sides. Dad, is that true? Marlene swooped in with tears, but this time they didn't land. We did what we had to do for the family. Lila needed... No. My voice sliced through her script. She didn't need, she wanted. And you chose her wants over my needs, again and again. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out the plastic piggy bank. Its cheap surface gleamed under the chandelier, absurd and damning all at once. I twisted the stopper free and shook. Dozens of crisp $2 bills spilled across the polished wood, scattering like confetti at a celebration no one wanted. This, I said, my voice steady, is what you thought I was worth. I've been saving one every week since Christmas, not as punishment, but as a reminder, a record of freedom measured in weeks, not chains. The bills lay between us, impossible to ignore. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's sobs faltered, and Lila stared at the money as if seeing it for the first time. I leaned forward. I'm not here to reconcile on your terms. If you want a chance at rebuilding, there are only two conditions. Family therapy, with a professional who won't let us dodge the truth, and respect for my boundaries. No manipulation, no sudden visits, no rewriting my story. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the bills. You don't dictate terms. Yes, I do, I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. Because I'm no longer a child in your house. I'm a woman who built her own. If you can't meet those conditions, then this is the last conversation we will ever have. The silence that followed was electric, charged with the shock of a script broken mid-performance. My mother's face crumpled, not into rehearsed theatrics, but something rawer, edges fraying. Lila looked between us, her eyes wide, as though the ground had shifted under her. I stood, sliding the empty piggy bank back into my bag, but leaving the bills scattered on the table. Keep them, I said softly. A reminder of what happens when you measure a daughter's worth in dollars instead of dignity. All right. Then I turned toward the door, my spine straight, each step echoing louder than their silence. For once, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in truth. The wedding ended in a blur of champagne glasses and polite conversation, but the confrontation in the library clung to me like smoke. Back in San Francisco, I tried to resume my life, pouring myself into projects and therapy sessions, but the aftershocks of that night followed me like phantom tremors. It began with whispers. Former co-workers from Portland sent hesitant texts. Your parents said you're unstable. They're telling people you had some kind of breakdown. The narrative mutated, spreading like mold, each retelling more warped than the last. I ignored most of it, reminding myself that lies couldn't topple the truth I carried. Still, the weight pressed heavy. Then, one Thursday morning, a manila envelope arrived at my office. No return address, just my name typed in block letters. Inside was a letter on cheap stationery, stamped with legalese. Notice of intent to pursue action for vehicle theft. My breath caught as I scanned the words. They were threatening to sue me for stealing my own Toyota. The car title sat safely in my file cabinet, my name alone printed on it, but the audacity still shook me. At the bottom, in Victor's handwriting, was a note. Return what isn't yours, or face consequences. My hands trembled as I slid the papers back into the envelope. It was absurd, baseless, but it was also terrifying. The idea that my own family would drag me into court, force me to defend ownership of the one thing I had bought and paid off myself, made my stomach churn. That night, sleep eluded me. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to the hum of the city below, wondering how many more tricks they had left to play. Every boundary I drew seemed to provoke another strike. For a moment I feared they would never stop until I was broken or back under their roof. But then morning came, and with it an email from the firm's executive board. My promotion to senior project manager had been approved. The Richardson Tower project, my design, my leadership, had finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule, saving the company millions. The news spread quickly through the office, congratulations pouring in from colleagues who had once eyed me with suspicion. I sat at my desk, the letter about the Toyota shoved deep in a drawer, while the new title blazed across my inbox. Senior Project Manager. 3 words that felt like scaffolding rising around me, each steel beam locking into place. My foundation was no longer theoretical. It was visible, undeniable. Later that week, I met Elliot. An environmental engineer on a parallel project, he carried himself with quiet steadiness, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but earned it naturally. He congratulated me on the promotion, then asked if I wanted to grab coffee. My instinct was to decline, old habits of self-protection, whispering that I didn't have time, that I shouldn't lean on anyone. But something in his calm expression disarmed me. We talked about sustainable design, about the poetry of bridges, about how buildings could both endure and breathe. His laugh was low, warm, the kind that smoothed rough edges without trying. For the first time in months, I felt a different kind of possibility flicker. That night, as I placed another $2 bill into the piggy bank, I realized the balance of weight inside me had shifted. The threats, the lies, the manipulations still hurt, but they no longer defined me. Against them I had built something stronger, work that spoke louder than rumors, a title no one could erase, and maybe, just maybe, a connection that didn't demand erasure of myself to exist. The aftershocks were real, yes, but they hadn't toppled me. They had revealed which structures could withstand stress, and I was still standing. The first call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was packing up my laptop. The screen lit with Lila's name, and my chest tightened. For months, every contact from her had meant pleas for money disguised as reconciliation. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something tugged at me, curiosity perhaps, or the faint hope that people could change. I answered cautiously. Lila? Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of its old bravado. Nora, I need to tell you something. She hesitated, then blurted out, I'm drowning. 2 jobs, late rent, debt collectors calling every day. I can't keep up. I braced myself for the inevitable ask, for the dollar amount she needed wired by morning, for the guilt-ridden plea about family. But instead, her voice cracked. I'm not asking you for money. I don't know how to do this. Will you show me how to make a budget? For a moment, silence filled the line, so profound I thought the call had dropped. My mind scrambled to adjust to this new reality. Lila, who had once twirled BMW keys under a red bow, was asking not for cash, but for guidance. It felt like the earth tilting under me, disorienting and strange. I exhaled slowly. I can do that, I said, careful not to let hope flood too quickly. But you'll have to stick to it. No shortcuts. I will, she whispered. That night, we spent an hour over video call, my screen shared as I walked her through spreadsheets. She scribbled notes, asked questions, faltered, then tried again. For the first time, I saw a sister who wasn't leaning on me as a crutch, but standing, however shakily, on her own feet. When we ended the call, I sat in stunned quiet. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a shift, small and undeniable. Weeks later, updates trickled in. Lila texting pictures of packed lunches instead of takeout, screenshots of credit card balances shrinking. She complained about exhaustion, about humiliation, but never once asked for my wallet. It was disorienting and, in its own way, healing. Then, news came about Victor. My father, the man whose voice had once thundered blame, whose signature had twisted my life into collateral, was 90 days sober. At first, I didn't believe it, but Lila confirmed, her voice steadier this time. He's going to meetings, Nora. He hasn't touched a drop in 3 months. The information landed awkwardly, like a foreign object in my chest. Relief tangled with suspicion. Could sobriety undo decades of control? No. But maybe it could be a first brick towards something different. And Marlene, my mother, whose tears had always flowed on cue. Lila reported she had begun volunteering at a community food pantry. Not for appearances, but because, according to Lila, she said she wanted to feel useful without strings. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother, learning usefulness without control. My father, learning to live without bourbon. My sister, learning numbers without entitlement. The family system I had fled was wobbling, yes, but wobbling towards something I hadn't dared imagine, change. I wasn't naive. I knew these were first steps, fragile as glass, but hearing them shifted something inside me. For so long, every revelation had been another blade. Now, for once, it was a tentative balm. That evening, I opened the piggy bank and slipped another $2 bill inside. The stack had grown thick, each bill a record of a week lived on my own terms. When I shook the bank gently, the weight surprised me. It was no longer just a container of resentment. It was proof of survival, of time claimed back, of strength stored. I set it on the windowsill, sunlight catching the edges of the bills inside, and felt something I hadn't in months, a cautious lightness. Not joy, not yet, but the faint relief of knowing that even in the rubble of what I'd left, sprouts might push through. And maybe, just maybe, the ground I was building on was strong enough to carry both the cracks of the past and the fragile beginnings of a future. San Francisco smelled of rosemary and sage that Christmas, the herbs sizzling in olive oil as the turkey browned in my modest oven. 1 year had passed since I had slipped my house key onto my parents' counter and driven into the storm. The apartment I'd once called temporary was now a home, every corner carrying the imprint of my choices, pottery bowls lining the windowsill, sketches of buildings pinned above my desk, laughter ready to fill the air. Friends trickled in carrying bottles of wine, trays of roasted vegetables, fresh sourdough from a bakery down the street. Maya breezed through the door first, wrapping me in a hug that still felt like rescue. Elliot followed, balancing a pie in one hand and a bottle of sparkling cider in the other. Soon the space buzzed with voices, the clatter of plates, the warmth of people who had chosen to be here. I caught myself pausing, absorbing it all, the soundscape so different from the brittle politeness of Portland gatherings. No performances, no optics, just company, just connection. The scent of roasted garlic and pine from the small tree in the corner wrapped around me like a blanket. Dinner began with clinking glasses, Maya raising hers. "To Nora," she declared, "who builds bridges at work and in life better than anyone I know?" The room erupted in cheers, and my cheeks flushed with heat I didn't hide. Conversation swirled easily, shifting from travel plans to work stories to neighborhood gossip. Elliot leaned over, teasing me about the uneven edges of the ceramic plates we ate from. I laughed, unoffended. Their crookedness felt like a badge now, proof of beginnings that didn't need perfection to hold worth. Midway through dessert, my phone buzzed, a message from my mother. My stomach tightened, reflexive, but curiosity won. I opened it. The photo filled the screen. The old dollhouse from my childhood, the one piece of joy I had clung to when birthdays felt hollow and graduations unattended. Its miniature windows still bore the stickers I had applied decades ago. Below it lay a set of documents, property transfer papers, my name typed neatly across the bottom. "It always belonged to you," the message read. "We're sorry it took us so long to see that." The room blurred for a moment. I blinked rapidly, unsure whether to believe it, whether to let the gesture slip past my defences. Yet something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition that maybe, finally, they were learning. I passed the phone to Maya, who squeezed my shoulder, her eyes soft. Elliot leaned in, murmuring, "Looks like they're trying." A lump rose in my throat. The dollhouse wasn't just wood and paint. It was a symbol, a fragment of childhood joy preserved against years of neglect. To see it returned, legally mine, was more than sentiment. It was acknowledgement. As the night wound on, laughter bubbled through the apartment, spilling into the hallway. We cleared dishes, clattered pans, argued over who got the last piece of pie. Every sound stitched itself into the fabric of a memory I knew I would keep. Later, after the guests left, I stood alone at the window. The city glowed with lights strung across balconies and lampposts, the bay reflecting them like a second sky. On the shelf beside me sat the piggy bank, now heavy with $2 bills, each one marking a week of freedom, of boundary, of survival. I thought of the dollhouse, waiting somewhere in Portland, ready to be shipped to me. For the first time, the thought of receiving something from my parents didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a tentative olive branch, fragile but real. I whispered into the quiet room, maybe. Maybe people could change. Maybe the story didn't have to end in ruins. And maybe, just maybe, I could accept a gift without losing myself. The apartment had gone quiet after the last guest left, the hum of laughter lingering like incense. Dishes sat stacked in the sink, the turkey reduced to bones, and the smell of sage still heavy in the air. I stepped onto the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, the December chill biting my cheeks. San Francisco glittered before me. Bridges strung with lights stretched across the dark water, their reflections trembling in the bay. Skyscrapers rose sharp against the night sky, some of them carrying my signature deep within their steel and glass. I traced the outlines with my eyes, columns I had calculated, foundations I had strengthened. They stood as silent proof. I had built things that endured even when my own family tried to convince me I couldn't. My phone buzzed on the railing beside me, a message from Lila. My pulse jumped. I opened it cautiously. The photo was grainy, lit by the yellow bulb of her apartment. A small clay cup sat crooked on her table, its rim uneven, fingerprints visible in its surface. "My first pottery class," her message read. Not pretty, but mine. I stared at the image, stunned. My sister, the girl who once paraded luxury cars and European trips like birthrights, was showing me her first imperfect creation. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't boasting. She was sharing something fragile, raw, and hers. Another message followed. "I thought you'd understand." The words loosened something inside me. For the first time, Lila wasn't trying to compete or manipulate. She was standing, unsteady but upright, on her own ground. I typed slowly, careful to keep the balance. I do. Keep going. Imperfect is still beautiful. As I sent it, the piggy bank caught my eye through the sliding glass door. It sat on the shelf, stuffed full of $2 bills, its plastic body stretched by the weight of weeks and weeks lived on my own terms. What had begun as a symbol of insult had transformed into a chronicle of resilience. I lifted it from the shelf, shaking it gently. The muffled rustle of bills filled the air like applause. I didn't need the money inside. Each note was worth far more than its denomination. They were lessons about boundaries, about survival, about the audacity of choosing myself. I placed the piggy bank back carefully and whispered the truth I had carried all along. Worth isn't what others assign, it's what I refuse to surrender. The city stretched out before me, alive and endless, a horizon of lights and possibilities. My family was learning, stumbling toward accountability. My sister was shaping clay instead of debts. My parents were taking halting steps into sobriety and service. None of it erased the past, but none of it erased me either. Behind me, the crooked bowls and uneven plates I had made caught the glow from the kitchen light, their shadows long and imperfect on the wall. They were mine, proof that I could create, endure, and hold, even when flawed. I drew the blanket tighter and let the night air fill my lungs. For the first time, the weight of history didn't crush me. It steadied me. Because this wasn't just a balcony or an apartment or a skyline. It was a life I had built brick by brick, boundary by boundary, and it was enough.